Hey everyone, we're gonna get cracking here with the show. Thank you everyone so much for being here. Welcome to this District 3 Focused Affordable Housing Forum. My name is Nick Ferris. I'm the treasurer for the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. I'm going to be helping guide this conversation, but really this is going to be the Shanti, Alex, and Joseph show, all right? Unfortunately, we might have some speaker problems here. We're testing this out. Let's see. Unfortunately, John Avalos had to cancel this morning. His daughter has COVID, so we felt it would probably be best that John not make it here tonight. So we're all grateful for that.
I think it's feedback.
I was going to say that's how we got on the last thing we had to be at together. Just kidding.
So big thanks to the sponsoring organizations for this. Barbary Coast Neighborhood Association, Russian Hill Neighbors, North Beach Neighbors, Next Village San Francisco, California Working Families Party, and then also just some really individual shout outs to Teresa Flandrich, Nancy Shanahan, and Peter Stevens. Without any of those individuals, these organizations, this would not have been possible. So really huge thanks to them. And last but not least, we got to thank the man, the myth, the legend, one of your bartenders, Nick Flewless, here, folks. Nick has very generously let us use this space. He is a true neighborhood supporter. Please grab a cocktail, grab a bite, support him for his generosity, and just a really great person. So thank you, Nick. Now, just going to begin. This is, a bit about how this event started. This is something that, a few of us at THD, we've been trying to learn a lot more about housing and housing policy, affordable housing. It means so many different things to so many different people, and it's just outright complex and confusing. And so we started this event really with the hope of going down a path of just understanding what is the state of housing today in San Francisco, in this district. And so this is the first event that we're doing, and we're going to start a series of events after this, really all geared at going down this journey of understanding what the state is today and how can we make things better. Anyway, so going to begin, that's it for me, going to begin now with some quick introductions, this esteemed panel. So first, I got to start off with Joseph Smoot. We are incredibly grateful that Joseph, on such short notice, was able to do this. We are really saved us a huge one here, Joseph. So, thank you. Joseph is the co-chair of the Racial Equity and All Planning Coalition. They're a coalition of 40-plus grassroots organizations throughout the city that focus on planning and zoning issues with the goal of ensuring a future with diverse communities, stable, affordable housing, and equitable access to resources and opportunities. He was also a former legislative aide to 2 supervisors in San Francisco. Welcome, Joseph. Thank you. Alex Lantsberg. Alex is the Research and Advocacy Director for the San Francisco Electrical Construction Industry, the Labor Management Committee of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 6, and the San Francisco Electrical Contractors Association. Alex has conducted research and authored reports for public agencies, environmental advocates, and labor organizations. He's active in shaping redevelopment of neglected urban neighborhoods and is committed to ensuring labor rights, social justice, and accountability in urban development in San Francisco and throughout California. Welcome, Alex. Next up, Shanti Singh. Shanti is the Legislative and Communications Director for Tenants Together, California's statewide renters rights coalition of 60 tenants unions and other housing justice groups across California. She left the tech industry, not a common route, impressive right there. Left the tech industry to work full-time in tenants' rights after organizing with renters in private, public, and nonprofit housing alongside housing justice groups in San Francisco. She formerly co-chaired the San Francisco Democratic Socialists of America and works on tenant and land use issues there, in addition to being a city commissioner for clean municipal energy and public banking. She's also the chair of the SF Housing Stability Oversight Board and board vice president of the San Francisco Community Land Trust. I don't know how she does all this, but she does it. Welcome, Shanti. All right, so we're going to kick this off. Affordable housing, this is a term that is used so many times. What the hell does it mean? It seems to mean have a different definition depending on who you ask. Joseph, we're going to start off with you. We know we need more of this, but what is affordable housing? What does it mean?
Okay, thanks for starting off with an easy question. And we'll see how the feedback goes, but seems like it's calm right now. So I am not going to get too technical, I swear.
Thank God.
Right? But we're going to start off with a couple of things. So there's, I think, a chart that's circulating around that's got some numbers on it. I think Teresa's holding it up right now. Okay, this is just a reference point. I'll get to it in a second. One of the terms that's thrown around a lot is called AMI. It's called Area Median Income. So this is a concept that goes back decades. It's a policy point that the federal government uses. There used to be a department of the federal government called Housing and Urban Development. Anybody remember that department? Yeah? All right, well, successive administrations have basically pulled all the funding out of it, but it still exists as like a shell of an idea, anyway, in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that they publish every year is this chart of what's called area median incomes. And the area, the statistical area for San Francisco is San Francisco, it's Marin County, it's part of San Mateo County, it's kind of this conglomerate. But it's used to set housing policy, this area median income. And the definition of low income is what's 80% of the area median income. And if we can all remember back to our school days, median is not an average. Median means it's the number that's kind of established where there's an equal number of people above the median and an equal number of people below the median. The reason why that's important is that the more and more rich people who move into San Francisco and take all the tech jobs that Shanti left, they pull the median up. So the median in San Francisco keeps going up even though the incomes of people, generally working people who are on that list that you have, don't go up. What that means is that what's defined as affordable housing or like low income, that number that's 80% of the median keeps going up as there's more and more rich people in this area, even though the incomes of teachers and laborers and restaurant workers and such aren't going up. So that means that as we keep defining that affordable housing, even if you say that 80% of median, it is 80% of a larger and larger number, that means that affordable housing keeps getting less and less affordable for people. But then what happens is that the term affordable housing keeps getting politicized by certain forces in the city, and they keep wanting to, meaning developers and the developer lobbies, and, quote, housing advocates? Anyway, we'll get into this later in the session. Is that they keep wanting to push the definition of what's affordable higher and higher. So it's not 80% of median anymore, which is what establishes the definition of low income by the federal government. Now the developer lobby is trying to convince us that affordable housing is 100% of median, or 110, or like what Proposition D tried to do last year, which is push it up to 130%, and 130% of median because the median has gotten so high. We're pushing up pretty close to what market rate housing is at that point, so affordable starts to overlap with market rate. So what happens is the politicization, sorry, my English isn't so good, of what is affordable in order to ingratiate market rate developers, because market rate developers now are required to provide some affordable housing, or what's called below market rate or inclusionary, you've probably heard these terms. The fact that market rate developers are leaned on to provide this housing, they want to keep pushing that number as high as they can get it, so it approximates what their market rate units are returning for them. So I'm going to leave my remarks with, okay, now I've just framed what affordable housing kind of is and isn't. What is most important, I think, to take away is to ask ourselves, who are we building for? And get away from all the numbers, right? Because like I said, the developer lobby wants to politicize the numbers and wants us to think, oh, 130% of median, now we're talking about something that maybe is affordable, but it's not. But we get lost in the numbers. So if we can come back to asking ourselves, who are we building for? And who are we not building for? And look at the market, and we know that the market is not building for the people on the list that y'all have. We know that. Even if we hear politicians say that they want to make housing cheaper, more kind of less expensive to build, that doesn't mean that developers are going to pass those savings on to any of us. That just means they're going to make more money, right? Because it costs them less to build. So anyway, yes, Nick.
One question there. So somebody touched on that was interesting is 130% of AMI can count as affordable housing. Does that sound right? That was the 120.
That was a proposal.
A proposal. What?
But 120% currently is kind of the upper limit.
Okay, so 120%.
AMI for homeownership programs in the city.
You guys are so 120% of AM. Like, how much is that? How much do you have to? How much are you making if you're 120% of AMI?
Well, you've got the chart, so you could tell us.
Well, this only is the income of.
Yeah.
But,
So-
but 100% of median in San Francisco is roughly $100,000 a year for a single person.
So I want to step back, because when we start talking about AMIs and start acronyming everything and throwing percentages out, what we do is actually mystify everything that's going on. Because what Joseph was talking about is big A affordable. Like, you know, when we talk about big A affordable, it's a term of art. It's like, you know, it needs a lot of definitions that goes back into public policy and laws and all this and the other. I want to talk about little A affordable housing. What is affordable housing? It's housing where you're not paying more than 25–30% of your income to live. That's what affordable housing is. And when we start talking about AMIs, this, that, and the other, one, like, I mean, I could see everyone's eyes were starting glazing over because nobody thinks in percentages and themselves relative to some sort of imaginary person that may exist there within together. So let's bring it back to real people. So Joseph passed out a chart of different occupations that qualify for different tiers. They would qualify for different tiers of affordable housing. And I don't know where all the numbers fall, but we, and I mean broadly, we as in labor in San Francisco, worked with Jobs with Justice and the Council of Community Housing Organizations, Choo-Choo, to put together a report called Housing Our Workers Report. And what we tried to do there is actually demystify a lot of that stuff and focus in on real wages paid to real San Francisco workers who are providing fundamental basic services, whether it's firefighters, whether it's electricians who work on Muni, whether it's nurses who work at General Hospital, or whether it's porters and you know, and home health aides who work helping with old folks in Laguna Honda and whatnot. And what we find is even at the highest classifications, being the best paid classifications, being nurses and firefighters and electricians somewhere around there, only about 7% of city workers can actually afford to live in town. That's what affordable ends up meaning, is that it's not. So the question I think goes back to, and a part of what I hope, and we'll throw it over to Shanti, that we can hope to discuss is how do we actually make it little A affordable for our workers to live in town, for people who grow up in town to be able to stay here and whatnot, and for folks who have been living here for a while not get booted out because their landlord thinks they can get a little bit more.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, and maybe part of this is because I've been in 9 lobby visits today with state legislators, so I'm very tired. We were talking about social housing, which is a whole other can of worms, and I might touch on that later. But talking about it as in the context of rent burden, not individual income. Talking about rent and cost burden, right? That's a huge huge swath of Californians and it's a huge swath of San Franciscans. And you know, one thing that I wanted to add too is I wanted to even zoom further out and situate this problem in decades of wage stagnation and racialized income inequality. I think sometimes people in San Francisco forget to talk about that because we were, I guess, lucky in some ways, unlucky in others, however you feel about it, to, you know, benefit from economic boom in a way that maybe other cities didn't. But it wasn't really, you know, people say a rising tide lifts all boats. That's not what happened here in the boom times or the bust times that we might sort of feel like we're in now. And so, yeah, I just want to add that as a +1 to kind of zoom out of the conversation a little bit about like this AMI or that AMI and talk about the context we're in and have been for decades. And again, that broader trend of racialized income inequality and wage stagnation is not just, we're not exempt from it because we had 2 tech booms. We're just not.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. Want to talk about the regional housing needs allocation, more commonly referred to as RENA. So Alex, what does RENA mean? How is this defined? Who comes up with these goals?
Really heavy numbers always. So the RENA is established by their state law that sort of set a formula on how they actually calculate this, but our regional governments through the Association of Bay Area Governments, I'm really trying not to acronym you guys to death. ABAG went through a process that had all the cities and some of the counties in there, and they had requirements to take a look at underbuilding from prior years, projections for future years, roll all that stuff up, and then give every city and county and sort of the unincorporated counties goals that they had to hit for these specific income categories, the big, sort of in the big A world. So they had to, maybe you could get into the details, but it's like basically for San Francisco, we were assigned, our homework was 82,000 units over the next 8 years. 46,000 of them, so about 60% of them have to be quote unquote big A affordable at various income levels. And I don't remember the exact breakdowns, but the basic nut of it is that 46 to 47,000 of the homes that San Francisco is supposed to not build, is supposed to permit. Because it's not about building housing, because local governments, for now, don't build housing. What it means is they have to permit these. So if you think about 47,000 affordable units, which is great. I mean, yeah, wouldn't it be cool if like the city could like just crank the machine and churn out 47,000 units for waiters and waitresses and actors and artists and you know, home healthcare workers and various folks who work in the city. But it can't, because it doesn't actually come with any money in it. It's like it's sort of a you shall do this, but we're not going to give you anything to do it. And the way the city is basically thinking about this stuff, from the mayor on down, is that, well, we need to just let private developers build as much as possible, so that we can hope to maybe pick up 10, 15, 20% of those units as big A affordable as part of their inclusionary housing requirement. Like, you can kind of see the numbers. It doesn't work out that way. And for anyone who sort of like follows housing development, which is, I think, everyone in San Francisco, at this point, what is the first thing that developers do when there's too many apartments out there, when rent's flat? They stop building. So the entire sort of logical premise of you're going to build so many units to lower rents when your entire model is based on rents continuing to go. So we're kind of in a conundrum because we have direction from the state to do something without any of the tools to actually do it, and an economic logic that will not permit it to be done. Sorry to disappoint.
So what is the state saying to build, and then what is actually getting built?
Oh, right. I mean, what the state says is build these units that are affordable to these income levels based on the stuff that Joseph was talking about. What's actually getting built is the stuff that makes money, because people who build this stuff are the ones who make money. I mean, over the past few years, we've had, I think, we've heard this in the Joint Housing Committee at the state, somewhere like 20,000 affordable, big A affordable housing units built through SB 35, a law that our Senator Wiener passed a number of years ago. And they're celebrating, they're talking about it like it's a big sort of consequence of the law itself, that, you know, just a little bit of streamlining has unlocked 18,000 affordable units. You know what unlocked those affordable units? The money, cash on the barrelhead. Because you can streamline to eternity. If there's no money to build this thing, it's not going to get built. And affordable housing, big A affordable housing, by its very nature does not make money. You do not make money housing poor people. There is always a housing crisis for working people. There's always a housing crisis for poor people. And just because people who have not felt the housing crisis have discovered the housing crisis, doesn't mean that once the housing crisis for them is solved, that the housing crisis for everyone else goes away.
One question, when you said big A, little a, what does that mean?
So big A affordable housing, which is what Joseph was talking about, that's regulatory, that has to meet income levels, that has income tests, that has all these Rube Goldberg patchworks of funding. That's big A affordable housing. Little A affordable housing is housing you can afford.
Got it. Got it. Okay, thanks. Something, Rena, just one follow-up to that, because I think Rena's, the city's starting to feel the impact of RENA. It's been increasingly significant. And this is for any of the panels, how is RENA broken up? And I sort of leading this, my understanding, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that RENA has goals for different tiers of maybe affordability. Like I think there's very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. And then they set goals for for each of those categories. That's correct. How are we doing against those, or which are the ones that we're building? Are there some gaps?
I think the important thing to understand is, so we're in a new RENA cycle, and because of a different law that Senator Wiener passed, SB 28, the calculation changed for this new 8-year cycle that we're going into, and the housing element was how we plan to build those units. And so this time, this 8-year cycle, the goals are higher across the board than they were in the past 8-year cycle. Last time we exceeded the above moderate income goals and did not meet the moderate income and low income goals. But I think what's important to understand is regardless of how the goal numbers change, is the proportionality. If we were underbuilding low income and moderate income housing before we up the goals across the board, imagine how much we're going to be underbuilding them this time. You have anything to add to that?
No, you can hold on to that, but that's right. It's an exercise. It's a regulatory paper exercise. It's not gonna. Maybe it'll result in some more housing. What it in many ways drives are regulatory changes on the back end to allow more sort of profit-driven development to happen, and maybe to entitle more big A affordable housing projects. But fundamentally, absent the funds to build, it won't get built.
By the way, I just realized I did a poor job here. I should have told you something very important at the start of all this. You probably came here to have some questions. You may have received an index card. If you have any questions that you would like to ask any of our panelists, please write down the question on the index card, and the man over there waving his hands, Peter, hand that card to him. And at the end, we're going to have some audience Q&A for the panelists. If there's someone that you wanted asked to specifically, one of our panelists, Shanti, Alex, or Joseph, preferably put their name on that as well, so we know who to ask that to. Thanks.
Nick, let me just add one comment onto this discussion about RENA. So just so everybody knows, so in the past 8 years, so San Francisco, so you'll hear a lot of this kind of narrative, especially in the mainstream media, right? We're not building enough. Somehow there's all these NIMBYs in San Francisco that are blocking all this housing construction from happening, right? In the last 8 years, San Francisco exceeded its RENA, as you heard what RENA is, this allocation of this housing goal from the state and from the regional government. We exceeded that goal by 10,000 housing units in the last 8 years. 10,000 housing units. But the way that it breaks down as we were, Nick was talking about the different income tiers. So you've got 3 tiers that are below moderate and 1 tier that's called above moderate, which is basically market rate. The below moderate is 57% of the goal. So the majority, more than a majority, of our housing goal is 57% of that overall number. We fell about 9,000 units short in the below moderate. Okay? And that's the affordable part of the chart. So we have 9,000 units that were in a deficit going into the new RENA cycle, which just started this year. And in the new RENA cycle, we once again have a goal of 57%. So those are the numbers that Alex was throwing out, right? 57% of the goal going forward is supposed to be below market, or below moderate is what they call it. There is not one additional dollar that's come from the state, and Alex mentioned this. We actually went to the budget chair, Assemblymember Tang's office. He is an assembly member who represents San Francisco, and is the budget chair of the assembly. He couldn't find any money for us for our affordable housing goal. So we're literally going into this new 8-year cycle with no plan from the mayor's office, no plan from the state to figure out how we're going to get 57% of our new housing in this RENA cycle to be affordable and catch us up on the 9,000 units that we didn't build in the last cycle. And this is one of the reasons why, you hear that the reason why there's so many homeless in San Francisco, that it's so hard as a working person to find affordable housing in San Francisco, is because we just don't have enough housing. But damn it, look at all the vacant units in the city. Look at all the, all the building that's going on in the city. We exceeded our RENA goals, right? We're not building our affordable housing. So leave us with this thought.
I want to throw a more fun number than talking about RENA goals. So I was looking this up. So one of the things that I do is I punish myself by looking at statewide numbers. So a number of years ago, I decided to compare what happened across California and California counties by decade. So between from the 2010 to 2019, San Francisco actually had the highest increase in total housing, percentage-wise, total housing production of any major county in California. We, compared to the production from 2000 to 2009, we went up by 61% of all housing units. Multifamily units, 70%. And this completely blew everyone away.
Despite the recession at the beginning of it.
Yeah. There was also a recession in a little one in the 2000s, that we recall. But there was also a housing bubble when anything could get financed. So the point is that San Francisco gets a lot of hate. Some of it maybe is deserved for some of the procedural mishigas would be the best way of putting it. But all that being said, we entitled this stuff, we approved this stuff, we build it. And at the end of the day, the decision whether or not you turn that shovel, or whether you turn that dirt and put in that shovel into the ground, ultimately depends on whether or not the developer is making double-digit returns. That's it. That's what it comes down to. And San Francisco was a place where people could do that for the past 15, 20 years.
Yeah. Two things I think that stand out to me. One, it's interesting that the state assigns these goals to us and then does close to nothing or nothing to actually support it. That's a little bizarre to me. And then also, I think the second one that stands out to me there is that, so according to the state's goals, we're basically just building the above moderate, but not actually building low income, very low income, moderate tiers. Maybe we need to incentivize that. That's an opportunity. All right, gonna shift here. Gonna shift over into some tenants discussion, tenants rights here. Shanti, I think everyone here, most of the folks here are in D3. D3 is one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in San Francisco. I think it's about 2/3 of all residents in San Francisco, in D3, are tenants, which is pretty interesting. How do we preserve our existing affordable housing? How do we preserve it? How do we preserve it from speculators? What are programs that exist to do this?
Yeah, I mean, once again, we're going back to the question of investment. That's what it is. It's money. Local, state, and federal, but at least what we can start acting on now is the local. I am a D3 tenant myself. I live in a rent-controlled one-bedroom with my husband, and I have been living in that unit for a quarter of my life now. I think it's great when I think renters deserve the same stability as property owners. Sue me, I guess. But yeah, as someone who's lived in D3, we are one of the densest neighborhoods and the second densest city in America, and that's not to say we couldn't make other places more dense. I'm all about it. But what is really, I was thinking as you were asking this question, when I actually did transition from just part-time tenant organizing to actually working full-time and tenants together like 5.5 years ago now, the first thing that my neighbor said was, she's like, thank God. I was like, what, why? She's like, well, now if they try to Ellis Act us or evict us, it's gonna be in the news. They're gonna bring a lot of angry people to our building. And she's lived in that unit for 50 years. She raised her son there. So yeah, I mean, it's been a huge problem. I've watched this unfold. I mean, part of the reason I even got involved as a 24-year-old at the time, feels like a while ago, in San Francisco politics at all was because there was an Ellis Act eviction on, I believe, Broadway and Larkin. It was, if anyone remembers that. Yeah. I had just moved here and I saw that, and that seemed pretty messed up. But that's what we've seen. We've seen a ton of speculative behavior, a ton of buying up by corporate actors. And this is I work across the state, right? So we're dealing with this in LA, and Fresno, and Bakersfield, and everywhere else too. But it was especially acute in San Francisco. And we have programs. We're in a sense like kind of taking the statewide view. Like in some sense we're lucky, but it doesn't feel very lucky. In that we do have things like COPA, the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, which I believe was passed by then Supervisor Sandy Fewer in 2019. We have, we do have rent control. A lot of cities don't have that. Of course, there's a ton of abuses that are hard to reform at the state level. That's what would have to be reformed at the state level, like Costa-Hawkins, which prohibits any vacancy control, like the Ellis Act, et cetera. And that's kind of the work that Tenants Together does at the state level. But that's, as a San Franciscan, some of that is out of your control because there's state policy that's, incentivizing rampant speculation of the kind that D3 has really, really suffered from. But we do have, we have COPA, but, if you have...
What's COPA?
Oh, sorry, I'm doing the acronym thing. It's so awesome. It's Community Opportunity Purchase Act. Well, what that means is there's COPA and there's TOPA, that's Tenant Opportunity Purchase, but the idea is that when a property goes on sale, that there is a bidding period where a qualifying nonprofit, if it's COPA, community organization, can purchase that and keep it, keep you as a tenant stably housed, and also, keep you from being evicted, and take that housing off the speculative market. A Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act, which we don't have here, but there are other cities that are looking into it. That's kind of like that's where the tenants themselves would get together and buy the thing. And that's great, but at the end of the day, once again, if you don't have the money, you have a small window of time as a community organization, so say San Francisco Community Land Trust. We have a window of time in order to put in a bid, but we still have to outbid the private market. That's hard. It takes money, right? So, I mean, once again, it's investment. We have the small sites program, which a lot of like COPA goes into, where we're taking these small sites off the market. So I live in a 12-unit building. I mean, hopefully nothing happens, but but if we were in that sort of situation, we would want to apply for COPA. So it's great that we have those mechanisms in place. What we don't have is, again, consistent funding. And this is something that, we've had to deal with. Alex and I are both on the San Francisco Housing Stability Fund Oversight Board. We're having to go year after year and basically come hand in hand and ask for consistent investment in the small sites program. And,
And could you define that, like Prop I funds, what is the stability?
oh, yeah, I'll get into that. So we did pass a transfer tax Prop I in 2020 to, I think was it 10 million? I should know this. long day. But we brought in so far about, like, even in the last couple of years, we brought in about $250 million with a B dollars of revenue for the city, but where that money is going to the general fund, so we are having to basically constantly be fighting to actually have that money allocated towards housing like the voters intended. They voted for rent relief, they voted for social housing.
I just want to note that when Prop I was on the ballot, the Chamber of Commerce put in a ballot argument basically saying you should vote against this because the money will not be used for what these people are saying they want it used for. And guess what? Their mayor is making that true.
Because the call is coming from inside the house. We're all trying to find the guy who did this, whatever meme you want to use. But you know, I mean, we are constrained in that sense, and I'm also thinking from the perspective of a tenant organizer, it's really hard. And some of you, I mean, some of you in the audience, I won't name names or point you out, but have been part of this process where, you know, if you have to be organizing that building, you're in immediate danger, sometimes immediate danger of eviction, but certainly you're already at a crisis point. Then you get to a point where you know, have organized sufficiently that maybe you can kind of like make a push to your supervisor or somebody else that please acquire my building. Then your supervisor has to go through, you know, unfortunately what I've seen is a lot of political contests over whether they've, you know, not angered the right people or pleased the right people in terms of whether your building is going to be acquired. That's not a strategy. And I think one thing that we've been talking, well, yeah, it's not a strategy, you know, that I think is about fiscal sustainability or social justice or anything in between those things. But you know, it's this idea, like, housing preservation is not just charity for the people who live in the building. I mean, of course, even if just on a human rights perspective, yes, people, like vulnerable tenants deserve to be housed, but it's also, it's homelessness prevention. It can be, if we start thinking about acquisition that way, the basis for a citywide fiscally sustainable system that can also help fund production. I know that's like it's just not how people are thinking about it right now, but that is how successful social housing systems in every social democracy work. And I mean, in some cases, what we've done, you know, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention 285 Turk and the Tenderloin. That's a building that as a DSA member in 2017 as a tenant organizer, as a part-time tenant organizer at the time. That building was a building full of low-income tenants, mostly like Central American, Black, Filipino. That building was bought up by a corporate landlord. We're finding out now that we've acquired it what a bad job they did at maintaining it. But that building was bought by a corporate landlord. Some of those tenants, like, they tried to use a loophole to try to de-rent control the building. They succeeded, unfortunately, through that legal loophole. Some of those tenants managed to stay, but we're now at the point with the SFCLT where we've acquired that building, we bought that building, and now not only are we trying to, of course, fix the mess that the corporate landlord made, but actually turn it into a cooperative ownership opportunity, low-income housing, limited equity housing co-op. There we go. So that's the third piece. There's homelessness prevention. There's a basis for a fiscally sustainable citywide social housing system. It can boost people into home ownership who would not be able to access it otherwise. There's a lot we can do in terms of preservation beyond just, like, I think which should be a laudable goal in and of itself, is keeping people housed in the communities that they live in. But there's and the last thing I'll say, again, I could go on about this forever, but also speaking about tenant organizing, I have to give a shout out to Housing Rights Committee and specifically the Veritas Tenants Association, who have created a citywide tenancy union where they have been organizing in Veritas buildings for several years, which is the biggest corporate landlord in San Francisco, right? And right now,
It's going bankrupt.
Not for long.
right? That's where I was about to get to. I guess maybe it's a part of I won't get into the nerd stuff about landlords across the country being over leveraged because interest rates went up, or what's that Warren Buffett thing he says, like, when the tide rolls out, that's when you see who's been swimming naked. But there's an article in the Chronicle this week that Veritas has $1 billion of property on sale. $1 billion with a B. And if we had a sensible strategy, not just when the market is up, but when the market is down, when it's most important, if we had counter-cyclical housing investment and acquisition, we could have a more transformative system. We could fund development even, and we could keep people housed. But we're letting that $1 billion opportunity slip through our fingers once again.
So I think we've got a hell of a lot more questions here. I think we can talk at great length about this. We need to jump to some audience questions here.
Please.
So a question, it looks like this is open to the floor here. Why is housing so expensive to build in San Francisco? By the way, Peter has been texting me all your questions, so I have them here.
Oh, there's more. Yes.
All right. So yeah, this is really just open to the floor. Whoever wants to take this, why is housing so expensive to build in San Francisco?
I mean, I think the first one is that this is an old city with a bunch of crap underground. So there's a lot of front-end work that needs to happen in order to be able to do construction. A number of years ago, I took a look at that same data set that I was throwing numbers off from earlier. I took a look at, one of the things that they do is they give you like the total permit value and the units that are permitted on a city-by-city or a county-by-county basis. And what was really just crazy was that when you compare San Mateo County or Alameda County to San Francisco, just on the straight, like what the developer reports as their permit value versus the units, so assuming everybody lies the same, you don't lie differently when you cross the county line. San Francisco building permit value was just, I don't remember what the percentage was, but it was significantly higher than what we saw in other places. And obviously some of it has to do with the types of buildings that we build. When you build a high-rise, it's going to be more expensive than when you, on a per square foot basis than when you build a single-family home, even though it'll cost you less per door, as they say, for the land itself. But we have a number of code requirements that actually different building code that exists in other parts of the Bay Area and other parts of the state. As our Local 6's business manager likes to say, the building code is written in blood. So there's a good reason for a lot of this stuff. Materials, most recently, materials prices have been escalating, and without any rhyme or reason, they're just going up and down. Really volatile for steel and for lumber and for concrete, all these things. Getting anything into town is a challenge, which means that those costs end up going up. And ultimately, it's always been expensive to build in San Francisco. I mean, it just always has been. That's part of the reason why our incomes here are generally higher, and why everything else is more expensive. I mean, it's like you're surrounded by water on three sides in San Mateo down there. So, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more expensive.
Yeah. How much of an impact does Airbnb and short-term rentals have on our housing stock? Shanti?
All right, a fair amount. I think this is it's interesting actually. When I first got started in San Francisco housing politics, it was very much a live subject. I mean, a lot of you have been around doing this a lot longer than me, but I was 24 or so around when we were doing the first big fight against Airbnb and SF, and there's much more now than there was then. I've noticed a collective admission, even from some people who generally disagree with me, that takes supply off the market. That's not a socialist argument. That's just econ.
And what is it? Because don't we have limits? I mean, you can't just, my understanding is that you can only do it if it's your home. You can do it up to 90 days a year, and then if it's a secondary home, it has to be at least 30 days or more.
We do now. It took a lot of fighting to get there, right? A lot of organizing to even get
everything is legal as long as you don't get caught.
6 years. Thank you, Teresa.
Yeah.
I mean,
But it also requires enforcement. So the last time we had a hearing at City Hall about short-term rentals, we found out there was one person in planning. So it's been shifted from planning to the city administrator's office and back to planning. There's one person. Remember Teresa worked with us on this hearing. And what he told us was that they're about 2 years behind on processing applications. And the way that Airbnb got the law written is that if the city is behind on processing applications, then that short-term rental gets to operate basically unregulated until the application is approved. So for those 2 years while the application is pending, those short-term rentals we don't even know where they are, and they're just simply operating.
Imagine getting a passport or Medi-Cal if you just had to apply and they never ever got back to you.
I do feel compelled to add too that as somebody who I did not work for Airbnb for the record, but I did work in the tech industry, and I think that model, and Alex can speak to this at another time, but there's also, you're seeing like housing justice organizations and labor currently coming together at the state level to tax Airbnbs to build social housing. That's a real bill that we're pushing for right now.
SB 584.
SB 584, baby.
SB 584.
But you know, it is kind of that model where you escape enforcement, you escape accountability the same way that Uber or other companies did, where it's the second generation of tech companies, or third, I don't know, whatever generation we're on, where they're kind of saying, we're just the middleman. Right? But like when you're actually having to deal with them lobbying and making laws, they don't act like the middleman. But in terms of what they think that their responsibility is for the, you know, outcome of their presence in any particular market, whether it's like, and this is true again for other gig companies, food delivery, taxis, etc. It's the same thing where it's like they kind of like they take a very active role in lawmaking and fighting regulation or pushing for regulation that has very difficult enforcement, and so isn't worth the paper it's printed on, but then when you call them out on it, they just tell you, we're just the middleman.
Yeah.
It's a technology, not a speculative tool.
Yeah, I mean, they say all we're doing is just creating this platform for all this stuff to happen, but the problem is the platform becomes like a free trade zone where no rules apply.
So even if it, I mean, I know that it impacts District 3 probably more than
It does.
any other district in the city. But even if you're in a neighborhood where there's not a ton of short-term rentals, one of the things, the kind of dynamics in the housing market that we've been talking about is the speculative nature of what this causes. So we literally have seen this on websites, is that if you are a landlord and you go to a landlord conference or you go to one of their websites, basically what they tell you is that if you're just renting to long-term renters, that you're basically running about the stupidest business model that you can run, because you can make a lot more money if you're in short-term rentals or if you're in what is now called intermediate length occupancies, which is basically corporate housing, and that is kind of the gold standard now for landlords. And so, I mean, there's the Veritas business model, which was, you know, you basically move tenants out in order to renovate their unit and then move somebody richer in who has now a new tenancy who can pay more. So that's kind of one business model, and you can see how far that got them, which is $1 billion in the hole with their banks. But then there's this other kind of more lucrative model, which is where you rely on tech platforms, as Shanti was describing, tech platforms basically to manage your units as corporate rentals, whether they're tourist rentals or longer-term corporate rentals.
We're going to go to the state level. Well, a bit of state and city actually. Has to do with the state density bonus. Just what's the impact of, you know, something that we hear a hell of a lot about. What is the impact of the state density bonus program on the construction of affordable housing? Is it effective? And then similarly, Home SF and the city's inclusionary housing policy.
I'll just tee it up for
That's
you,
a lot.
Alex, because it kind of, this kind of goes with the comment that I was just making in terms of kind of the speculative nature of housing policy. So the state density bonus basically confers value to developers. So you get to build more building, or you can make more money, so it basically confers value to the land for a developer without having to go through any rezoning process at all. But it doesn't come along with it any additional requirements for paying any additional fees or providing any additional affordable housing or inclusionary housing. So basically, one of the things that it's caused is that developers, kind of in a down cycle that we're in right now, is they'll go and they'll get their permits, they'll get their entitlements for the bigger building that they're now able to build, and then they'll sell the property with the entitlements. And so basically it's worth more now than it was before the state density bonus was applied, but there's no additional requirement to provide anything back to any of us.
Yeah, I think we see a lot of that happening in this neighborhood. I think some of us were in a meeting last night. It popped up in conversation. You know, there's a building, there's a restaurant. I think it was Caesar's, as I remember, and that's been entitled. But you know, I keep getting asked, well, why isn't anything happening? Why? It's been like what, 5-6 years.
We've got, San Francisco's got like 70,000 some units that have been entitled, so approved to move forward. that aren't getting built. Now about 40 of them, is it 40 or 50,000 of them, something like that? 30, I can't remember the exact number, are in these mega projects. So like 11,000 units at Park Merced, we've got 12 some thousand, maybe 8,000 at Park Merced, 12,000 down in Candlestick, 1,600 in India Basin right by my house. So these big mega project type things. But then when you take that out, there's still about, several 10,000 of projects in smaller buildings that are just sitting there, that have been entitled for years. And all you need to do is go back to the Planning Commission and ask, after 3 years, and ask to re-up. Yeah, for an extension. Like, market sucks. What can you do? But just to give you an idea of just how land prices escalate. So right now, Senator Wiener is trying to extend SB 35. It's a bill called SB 423 right now. And we had been opposing it. I don't know what our official position is at this point. There have been negotiations and stuff, and I haven't been briefed. But one of the projects that was being discussed was the first sort of, what was the mixed income, the first market rate affordable housing, or first market rate SB 35 project that was permitted and is now getting built down in Saratoga, down in Santa Clara County. Well, it was entitled by Sand Hill Development Company, kind of guess where they're at, or so, and they do a bunch of stuff. They're doing that Valco Mall down in Cupertino, and they do offices and biotech and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, they entitled this thing. It was 98 units. It was like 91 units, just like a piddly-ass little thing. Only 10% affordable housing entitled through SB 35. Well, they didn't build it. They got it entitled, I think, in 2019 or something like that. They've been sitting on it. Well, they sold it. They sold it to Pulte Homes. We don't know who Pulte Homes is. And they made $12 million on the deal, doing nothing. I mean, buying a piece of land, putting in a piece of paper, and then selling, and then essentially flipping it after 3 years. They made like $12 million off of it. So that's the process. I mean, it's like, so entitlement is, I mean, what you see at the planning department isn't housing development. What you see is sort of asset hoarding and the creation of tradable assets that can be moved around in secondary markets and sold and whatnot. And eventually housing will get built. But the purpose of many of the people standing in front of the Planning Commission isn't to build housing, it's to build their assets.
I'll just add super quick, like the problem that we're facing, especially in this moment in San Francisco, including in D3, is that we can't just build when the market is booming. We have to build when the market is down, when people are suffering. I mean, I really think that's it, and I don't think that any of this solves that problem.
All right, we're going to try and get through just a couple more here. This is, I think, hopefully a quick one. Is there a pathway for folks to leave or bequeath their property to COPA or the community trust?
Shoot me an email. I will give you my email. Come find me.
Yes.
I will be
Shanti
here.
takes all property.
All right. Talk to Shanti right after this. How are seniors who no longer are working considered? How are seniors who no longer are working considered and perhaps protected in this housing shortage problem? Is affordable housing being built for seniors specifically?
Not enough. I mean, and I do want to shout out, particularly in the process that we've gone, the social housing process, which encompasses a lot of long-term visioning and short-term immediate asks. I do want to shout out Senior and Disability Action, who've been relentlessly bringing up this problem to us, that the existing housing that we have for seniors is underfunded, but then also we just don't have enough. I don't think that and I think this is, I wish I think it was a Washington Post article that I saw today about like seniors and homelessness and how we're just not, I mean, it goes back to just we're not investing in the welfare state as a country, but in terms of what we can do in San Francisco, we have to do a ton more, and yeah, there are programs that we have, but I mean, what we're hearing time and time again is that it's not adequate, it's not sufficient.
It's true. I'm going to give a little bit of a bright spot of optimism, maybe. 4,200 Geary just broke ground out in the Richmond district. That's senior housing. Also, self-help for the elderly is stepping up to start to develop affordable housing, especially on the west side. So, yeah, they're trying to build their capacity to become an affordable housing developer, not just for seniors, but they're going to be, of course, taking that on. So there's a little bit of bright spot, but as Shanti said, it's not nearly enough.
So I have to, after he said 4200 Gary, I'm sure it's a fine enough project, but I do want to point out that nothing good can happen without I guess our mayor punching someone. Essentially, is that 4200 Gary is actually one of the subjects of what's becoming a labor dispute, because even though the city has a project labor agreement that says that anything funded through general obligation bonds or coming out of the general fund is going to be built by workers dispatched out of the union halls, the mayor decided, is like, well, it doesn't apply. And the remedy for that, I mean, this is how sort of gross it all is that the remedy is for the contract to be voided. Yeah. So we, on the union side, have to figure out how to navigate this process to make sure that we don't blow up housing getting built for our seniors, while we make sure that a contract that we signed with the city is actually enforced, and that the hundreds of trade workers who for years relied on a booming downtown office trade to keep them, and a convention trade to put food on the table, that we, like, just Local 6 has 230 journeymen out of work, 50 apprentices that are on the list. The plumbers have 200 and a similar amount of apprentices. So there's about 1,200 union trade workers that are unemployed right now because of really what's happened post-COVID, the changes that have happened post-COVID. And we have an administration that, in its quest to start fights, decided to pick one there.
So listen, we're just at time here. We're gonna do one last question for folks, and then, hopefully they will stay here, maybe buy them a drink, I don't know. And if you have any more questions, we can ask them. But we're gonna end on this one. This is an audience question that I felt was a fitting one to end on. We're gonna start up with Joseph, with you, Alex, Shanti. What's the most important thing you want people to know about affordable housing in San Francisco? You got 30 to 45 seconds.
We need more of it. No, but seriously, I think because I'm here tonight, kind of as a representative for the Race and Equity and All Planning Coalition, I'm going to say that there is something you can do about it. I think that's probably the most important thing that I want you all to take away. So if you look up repsf.org, repsf.org, we are recruiting people. We've actually got an action going on tonight where we're flyering, where the Director of Planning and the Director of the Planning Commission are doing a forum tonight. And we're flyering that event tonight because we want people to know that there's another way to look at this, rather than incentivizing market rate housing and kind of calling that affordable, which is what our planning department is doing, that we need to be recruiting people into actually making policies that prioritize affordable housing. When you look at the RENA goals and all this stuff that we were talking about earlier, honestly, the easiest way, or the best way maybe, for the city to meet its production goals is to actually invest in affordable housing. Because if we just kind of relax and rules and deregulate market rate housing, all we're doing is creating this kind of speculative environment that we've been talking about. And you end up with this kind of backlog, as Alex mentioned, of like 70,000 units of housing that's just kind of entitled, and people are just kind of buying and selling land and trading on these entitlements. They're not building anything. They're not building anything affordable, that's for sure. But if we actually invest in affordable housing, and that means that we all need to take action. We need to hold our mayor accountable. We need to hold our state legislators accountable. Actually funding affordable housing. Shanti's brought this up. Now's the time, right? Land isn't going to be cheaper than it is now. It's just going to keep getting more expensive. So we got to get out there. We got to buy land. We've got to queue up projects to get them starting to get built. We need to make sure that we're not selling off our public lands. We need to hold those in trust for the public and make sure that we're building affordable housing on our public land. There are so many resources that we have that we can mobilize, and it's all up to us to make sure that that's what gets prioritized, rather than deregulating the market that really only cares about the market.
Yeah, I think all three of us are going to say, is like, there's not enough of it.
Yeah.
In the short of it. So I want to sort of take that in a slightly different sort of direction. think Joseph is absolutely right. Shanti mentioned a little bit earlier about the work that we've been doing on the Housing Stability Fund Oversight Board. See, no acronyms. One of the first things that we did in try to allocate, was it $64 million to the small sites program, was we took a look at what was actually happening in the sort of in the multifamily market in general. And what we saw was the buildings that were for sale were, I don't remember, like 30% of the discounted off of what they had been just 2 years ago. And the thing is that all these buildings were making money for their owners because I had access to pretty sweet real estate data, and we got to take a look at rent sheets to see what people are paying in these things, whether they're vacant and like what the market rate rent was, or whether it was occupied. And uniformly, all of these buildings were making gobs of money, and including the Veritas buildings that Shanti was talking about. So the affordable housing will only get built when we decide to put the funds and resources in order to do it. That's simply it. That's simply it. And that means that opportunities like the Veritas shouldn't be thrown away. They're not slipping through their fingers. They are being handed to us. They are being opened up and looked at by our rulers, and then they say, nah, because that guy came up with this program. This guy I don't like came up with this program, or these loudmouth lefties are complaining about us. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. So like I'm punchy and cynical today, which is really a great combination. But the point is that we can do this. We just have to want to do this. And I don't want to miss the opportunity. I gave all of you guys, or most everyone here, a handbill. It's a little thing that we put together. So San Francisco decided to do a little experiment with offshore built outside of San Francisco, offsite factory built housing. 4 projects in the city. 4 of them paid with public funds directly, or 3 of them paid with public funds directly. A 4th one paid through the back door, so we can't actually get a lot of documents on it. All three that were paid directly with public funds have come in late, have come in over budget, and they have come in with significant building defects that were only caught because the general contractors couldn't control their site. Go check out the QR code, or go to Honest Builders Coalition, and you'll see why it's such a cluster cuss as fantastic Mr. Bucks.
All right, I will try to keep this 45 seconds. I'm used to yelling at state legislators like an auctioneer, just talking really fast. But yeah, I mean, Joseph and Alex already touched on this. With public investment, again, yeah, there's a lot of like perception that it's the left that's pie in the sky. It's like, no, we're actually talking about good governance. We're talking about being strategic and consistent in our affordable housing funding in a way that we are not now, and fiscally sensible, as Alex brought up with rent control buildings and other buildings. From a governance perspective, Joseph already brought this up. I mean, personally, I think it's a shame that it is actually genuinely easier for me to get a hold of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's policy staff than the policy staff managing the housing programs in the city. I am speaking from personal experience. And frankly, I mean, again, I'm happy to talk more about social housing in another panel. God, Lord knows I do that already, and there's a lot of momentum about that at the state level. The entire statewide tenants' rights movement in California is pushing a long-term campaign for public investment for all of our communities, not just San Francisco. But this is where the movement is going. We are going into a long-term fight for public investment, not just connected from the local level I'm involved in, the state level I'm involved in, the federal level. I can tell you we're all talking to each other, and this is where we're going. We are falling behind. San Francisco, we love to think I love us. I love here. This is my home. I'm going to stay here until Veritas tries to come for me. But we are falling behind. Conversations about social housing and housing investment, they're not just happening. There is going to be an AOC bill in a few weeks, by the way. I can't say what's in it. But we're seeing this push for investment in LA with Measure LA, San Francisco with Prop I. I was talking with folks in Fresno today, Seattle, Rhode Island, New York City, New York State, Maryland, Texas, Chicago, Hawaii. Thank you. I'm already forgetting a bunch because I talk to these folks all the time now. And frankly, I think with the work that we're doing in San Francisco, like, we're falling behind on this conversation. The train is leaving the station. And I think that if everybody would want to fire people up and say, like, we can turn that around. We still can.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Huge thank you to our panelists, Shanti, Alex, and Joseph. Fantastic discussion. I think we've all learned a lot, but also many more questions have arisen, which is great. If you guys want to stick around and have any questions, I think some of them will be here. Please do that. And a big thank you again to all of the sponsoring groups that participated in this, and Nick Flewless. Thank you. Have a good night.